What's going on, everyone? We wanted to bring you question and answer. A lot of questions that we get through Hoop Dynamic or through my social media page. Also conversations that I have with my boys and also Mike. So we kind of wanted to bring you some of those topics with a question and answer. The first one is.
So hooping in New York, what was it like? Just kind of talk to the people about, there's so much history in New York basketball and just how you feel like you fit in there and growing up around that.
Yeah. So I think New York is always different. Like New York has always been, was quote unquote the Mecca. And I was growing up in 97 through 2003, I'd say, 7th grade through high school. And it's way different than Texas. Like Texas, these kids have these enormous gyms. And the basketball is different. In New York, we grew up in these small gyms. So like, guys had handles because that's the only way that you could get by your defender.
Right.
You couldn't pass and move. So like you had to develop a handle because the courts were shrunk. So to get by your guy, you got to be able to handle in tight space and get by. And then, created atmospheres.
Yeah. So like, what do you like as far as atmospheres? You like all over Texas, we're putting these big gyms up and stuff. Like that. And like a lot of times, like a big game, the gyms just don't get filled. Yeah,
and that's what I see in Texas. I've been to high school games, and people say, "Oh, it's the best high school game." I'll go to a high school game. I'm like, man, this atmosphere is nothing like New York.
Right.
Especially like when I was growing up, you'd have, 3,000 people could sit in there, but it was on top of each other. There was no room on the court. So people would be lined up on the baseline, the sidelines, and it just created a different atmosphere. And I think, me going into college, it helped me be able to play the Carrier Dome in these, arenas that, there'd be 40,000 people at, because that to me was harder to play at.
Right.
So growing up in New York, and then it was, for me at a young age, I was really good. So I was in 8th grade on varsity, and I'll never forget my first game was at Marshall, which is the smallest gym. Like the 3-point line you could shoot, it was probably 5 feet, and then it was half court. So they were trapping and pressing, and I was so nervous at that game. But there was probably, I would say, 2,000 people in there. It was packed. It was loud. Their guards, one was going to Iowa, the other one was going to Marshall. So like they were really good. And I was in 8th grade, just like sitting there like, yo, this is nuts. There's no way I'm gonna be able to play at this level. But that game got me through almost like all my little fears. Like, no, I can do this, because I hit my first 3 and I was like, oh, okay, like I'm ready for this.
Yeah.
So New York is always different, man. I think it's just way different than any other state. I think it's the hoop, the hoop mecca.
So I think with me being from Texas and a little bit younger, I think one of the first experiences I got just from the New York basketball was Sebastian Telfair's Through the Fire.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I guess that's what a lot of people from the outside looking in, like, kind of based it off of. You saw the gyms, you saw the crowd, you saw the atmosphere. You played against Telfair, right?
Yeah, Bassie was a year younger than me. So we played against Bassie in the primetime shootout, which was the event that LeBron played at. And then we played them in the Federations in New York State my senior year, and our big guy was hurt, and they ended up beating us, I think, by like 6 or 8.
And how old was he then?
He was a junior.
And were people following him and stuff like that? Just like
yeah, it was different though. I grew up with LeBron, so LeBron was, it was way different. Bassie was really good, and he was a New York City guard, which. He was Stephon Marbury's cousin, Jamel Thomas, who played at Providence, his cousin. So he was really well known in New York City, which obviously drives up into upstate. So he was kind of like that guy that everybody wanted to do well out of New York as a small guard, and Through the Fire was kind of his way of his story. And our high school team was on that, but it was a phenomenon, I say, in New York. But LeBron was like a phenomenon all over the country. Yeah. It was just different.
Now that you're a trainer, looking at Telfair's game, where do you think the NBA success didn't really come? What do you think he lacked as far as his game?
Well, I think there's a lot of like, I don't know if he was an elite shooter. He was an elite passer, like elite. He saw things on the court. I remember playing against him, and he, his decision making, coming off ball screens, and just the little things he saw. He was elite, but he wasn't like an elite shooter. You didn't have to respect him, from 24 feet. And that was one of the things, and I think it's being a New York City, guard, like, when you play outside and stuff, you can't shoot like.
Right.
You can't shoot like that because the wind and all that stuff. And, I think that's the one thing he lacked. And then, obviously there was some off the court stuff with him. But, Bassey was always really good, man. He was, his high school team was really good. But I would say he, the shooting part. And then, at that time, I think it transitioned a little bit into smaller guards to bigger guards. And he was only about 5'11", so... you gotta, the transition of the game, you look at like Russ Westbrook now and guys like Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, like all these guards are 6'3" to 6'5" now. I'd say the only, smaller ones are Dame, CP3, who is from the old school era, and Kyle Lowry, and those, now you're talking about Chris Paul, who's a Hall of Famer, and Kyle Lowry, who's NBA champion. So, I think that's the kind of the dynamic. He was, he kind of came in when the league was kind of changing into a new realm of you got to be able to shoot and then you got to be able to switch and guard.
Right.
And I think that's kind of where, everything shifted.
Who were some of your favorite players growing up in New York?
In New York?
Yeah.
I grew up in upstate, so it was a little different, but like I grew up, the guy like I was talking about, Chauncey Leslie, who went to Iowa. He was a guy I looked at all the time. 6'3" guard, just super athletic, played overseas for like 15 years. He was probably one of the better guards out of our area. John Wallace, was from our area, was Mr. Basketball, went to Syracuse. And then I followed Syracuse. I was, 45 minutes away. So we went there, and when I went there, I got the chance to see like Allen Iverson in person, and Ray Allen in person, and Shammgod in person, and it was like, yo, these dudes are ridiculous. And that's what I think kids don't get, is like you were seeing these dudes as like, I think Ray Allen was a sophomore and Allen Iverson was a sophomore. Like they were insane. And the level of college basketball back then, because dudes were staying longer, was crazy. You had first round draft picks that were juniors,
right?
Top 10s that were juniors, not freshmen who are still trying to learn. Like you had straight up 21-year-olds who were in college, and it was a different game. So, and then, in New York City, we had Omar Cook. It was the three guards: Omar Cook, Talik Brown, and then Andre Barrett. Seton Hall, St. John's, and UConn, and they were in Slam and all that stuff, and those were kind of the three guards that I looked at, as the top of the line. And then I ended up playing against them in college, which was cool. But those were kind of the guys I looked at as far as like New York went.
Now, just talk about like the New York attitude. Just the playing style, like you said. A lot of people weren't shooters. Mm-hmm. Just talk about like how that attitude has brought you to Texas, and you kind of have a little chip on your shoulder out here, the way you train and your methods and stuff. Just talk about how you picked that up.
Yeah, I think like it's a little different. Like when I moved out here, I think a lot of people were like kind of like taken off guard by like how I talked on the court and how I interacted on the court. I think Texas had a very laid back, attitude.
Right, and also with you, like you're a white dude to begin with, so yeah. Most of the time they just say that's a white boy trying to be black, but they don't realize like.
Yeah, I think
New York is different than just a white and black. It's more of an attitude. It's more of just a culture.
Yeah, New York is way different. As far as like, attitude and white collar. Like you got to be tough. You gotta, like when you grow up in those gyms and you go to the Boys and Girls Club and there's, people literally standing like this. It's like the next time you're in that environment, that's what you work for.
Right.
You know what I mean? So like I would show up and, that's the moments I'd work for. So I would dribble my basement. I would, do everything. And I was cocky, because of how much work I put in. And, you know, I had a lot of shit with me. You know, I had a lot of shit that a lot of white dudes didn't have. So when I walked into those city gyms, it was like, oh, you know, and I fed off that.
Yeah.
And I kind of like developed you know, an attitude of, you know, being cocky but confident, and kind of being in between the two, and knowing like, as a white kid, I'm already against I'm already behind.
Yeah.
Because when I walk in the gym, like it's what everybody says, shooter. So my first thing was like, you know, I would bop somebody.
Right.
And you know, boom, and they'd be like, oh wait. And that's kind of how I developed like in my city, and then became known throughout New York State, was like, oh no, he actually has some shit with his game. And then you develop that attitude of I really thought back then I was like the best, like I always thought I was the best player. And then I came down here and it was just kind of like a very like laid back personality. You know, not saying that there's not dogs. I mean, you got Kenny Martin. I mean, but it was different. It was not, you know, the blue collar in New York and the East Coast is different than the Texas, you know, laid back. I mean, we grew up in snow. I had to shovel my driveway. I wore gloves outside to play basketball. And these kids out here, it's like they just get these air conditioned gyms. I was like, this is insane. I remember going to some of these gyms and houses. I'm like, what?
Right.
And I'm like, oh no. And I kind of was like, I got to teach these kids how to be dogs, you know, and how to, you know, how to work, understand, you know, a mentality, and you know, it's like, you know, some of them think I'm just psycho, but like I took how I trained and how I played into my training, for sure.
So let's talk about your training a little bit. You know, you always speak, you know, off camera for sure. We always talk about you in your basement dribbling. Yeah. You know, a lot of people see you doing 2-ball dribbling, tennis ball stuff. Let's talk about like where that came from.
So I was a big Jason Williams fan, White Chocolate, and I went to camp, 5-star camp. I think it was 7th grade. And he showed me like all these drills, you know, because I was really good as a young kid, and I kind of stood out at those camps. And so he showed me all these drills, like wrist weights, garden gloves, and I just went back and did it. And I dribbled in my basement 2 hours a day.
At what age do you think you started this?
Probably 11, maybe 11, 10. You know, I would say 10, 11. Like I watched. It's funny, the Jordan thing came, like my dad was such a big Jordan guy, and so I watched, like I was a diehard Jordan fan, and I remember just watching him and then going down and dribbling, or watching Isaiah Thomas and going down and dribbling, and then watching like these college guys and going to like the old Big East. I remember going and watching those games in the basement on like a little TV, and being and just, you know, dribbling. And that's kind of how I developed all my handle, was watching how the really good players did it and then try to put it into my game. And then where I grew up, I had to figure out a way to make myself better without anybody around me as much. So I did 2-ball, I did, you know, weird kind of technique drills, you know, that I still obviously do today. And then, you know, jump shot, I mean, you know, I would shoot 1,000 jumpers a day with my
That's
pops.
what I kind of want to ask, because we talked about the fact that, you know, it's hard to develop a jumper out in New York. Like you said, it's windy, the conditions and stuff. How did you know, because, I mean, we've been in the gym many years now, and a lot of people like Tyler's handles are crazy, and I'll tell them straight up. I won't tell you this straight up, but like I feel like a lot of times your jump shots equally, or if not better than
yeah, my jump shot's better than my handle.
And I mean, like, we go through drills all the time, and you won't miss in these drills. Like it's one rep and we're done.
I think that came from my dad. Just like shot making to him was so big, where I wanted to be more flashy.
Yeah.
Like he kind of drilled in my head, you know, you gotta make shots.
Do you think that the flashiness came from the fact, like you said, you'd walk on a court and they'd be like, oh, that's a shooter, so you want to prove them wrong, so you didn't want to be labeled as a shooter as much?
Yeah, I think that's part of it. Like at a young age, when I was in like 4th or 5th grade, I played up, and I realized like if I just am a shooter, like that's all I'm gonna be. And I had to start to get some, you know, some shooting, because I was so competitive at a young age that like if we lost anything, like I would ball for like hours. And I liked the hype. Like I enjoy, and I still do, like I enjoy like the showmanship of basketball. So when I started to develop my handle, I saw, you know, how the crowd would react, or like how my teammates would kind of like react, and I love that part of it. But my jump shot was always what came first. I mean, my mom played pro, and my dad was a college football player, but had, you know, Division I offers. So like they knew the game. You know, we did form shooting as a young kid. I did form shooting, you know, which I still did growing up, for hours and hours and hours, out in my yard. And then what developed my range was like we didn't have a 3-point line. So like I would just shoot, and sometimes I didn't realize how far I was shooting from. You know what I mean? Yeah. I think in like with kids these days, they kind of like, whoa, this is really far. Like I didn't have that. I was just like, I don't know where I am, but I think I can make this shot. So I just kind of kept developing that shot. And that's what kind of into, you know, middle school and then high school, you know, I would shoot 7-8 feet behind the line with I would, you know, it just was what I did. So I think my jump shot was like, you know, like Coach Beeline would say it. That's why he recruited me, to be able to shoot the ball. So yeah, my handle was always there. It just, my jump shot was what I think is always going to be the separator.
Yeah, that's what you preach now. Like, you can dribble all you want, but if you don't have if you can't show that you can shoot the ball, then nobody's going to respect the handle.
Yeah, and it's funny. Like me and Julius were talking about this the other day. Like when his handle doesn't feel right, his game doesn't feel right. Like so, like as a basketball player, that's how I felt. Like when my handle felt awful, my jump shot felt awful because my pickups weren't clean, my game wasn't clean. I didn't think I could get to my spots. I was thinking too much. So like, I do a lot of ball handling because I know it helps your shooting. And like some people are like, oh, it's like, you do it to be comfortable. You don't do it to like do all those things. You do it that when the moment comes, you can react, or the ball's coming up quick into your shot pocket. You're not doing it to do 95 combinations.
Right.
But that's how you work on your handle. That's how you get better at it. Yeah. You know, so it's annoying when people are like, oh, you're not going to do that in a game. It's like, yeah, I know that. And you're not going to take 20 jump shots in the corner with nobody guarding you. Yeah. You know, so.
Now let's talk about a little bit, like you said, like people like criticize what you do. I mean, you have 400-something thousand Instagram followers, so every post you make, there's gonna be some haters talking about this doesn't translate to the game, especially like your tennis ball stuff, your 2-ball dribbling stuff. Yeah. Just not to teach anybody, but just like talk about your techniques and why you do it. Like kind of just talk about, you know, the comfort and like this game situation will be able to do everything without thinking about it.
Well, I think as far as like hand-eye coordination, like a tennis ball directly affects your shooting. I mean, Steph Curry does tennis ball stuff. He's the best shooter probably the game's ever seen, as far as off the dribble, off the catch, every nuance of shooting. So I think like your hand-eye coordination with a tennis ball, it helps your shooting. But it also is, for me, the reason I do it is because I needed a challenge. I needed pounding and going through the legs it was too easy for me. And when I included a tennis ball or 2-ball, it became harder. I started feeling more game realistic, like I started forgetting about where the ball was. And I started having to think about where the tennis ball was, translates into seeing the court and seeing the game. Or 2-ball, you know, having to control 2 basketballs. You know, like when people dribble a lot by themselves, it's only them. When there's usually another defender. And then they get to the games and it's like they're worried about that defender in front of them. So I felt like 2-ball and tennis ball, when I played, helped me never worry about this defender. And then it helped me make decisions on the backside of the court, which with my players now, I think also helps them. Like a Trenton Walters, you know, like he's never worried about who's guarding him. And you go, and he's trained that way the whole time. Once he gets to the second level, it's decision-making time.
Right.
You know, so I think just like ball handling in general is such a key ingredient to everything. And that's why I do a lot of it, because I played at a high level, you know, higher level than a lot of trainers did. So I can feel what a workout looks like. I can feel what makes somebody better. I can feel all that stuff because I did it, you know. So I think it's a little different. That's why I hate sometimes when, you know, it's like as a trainer, doesn't matter if you played. And I don't think it always does, but I think sometimes it absolutely does. Because you know what made you better. Like you felt it if you were in competition at a high level. So do I think it's everything? No, but I do think at times it does matter for sure.
Yeah.